Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Kidney Conversations with ReMend. My name is Kiku Boyance, and I am the Executive Director for ReMend, a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering people with kidney disease. And this is a webinar designed for patients by patients, and where we have an open, honest discussion about kidney care. We're a group of everyday people who've experienced chronic kidney disease, dialysis, or have received a transplant. ReMend provides peer-to-peer mentorship, guidance, and emotional support. And our goal is to encourage and empower those people who are on their kidney journey. Our website's a great place to learn more about what we do and the different ways you can help us help others on their kidney journey. So please visit remend.org. When I was researching and preparing for today's webinar, I kept being pulled in so many directions. There's so many ways this conversation can go. The topic of clinical trials goes deep, and there's much to be learned about why clinical study participation matters. Joining a clinical trial is a personal decision, and it's important to consult with your doctor and ask questions. By volunteering for a clinical trial, you may be helping your community and people in general. But what do you know about clinical trials, and how do you find out about them? Is it dangerous? Is it right for you? Here's a quick fact. According to the National Library of Medicine, more than 70% of the general population believes that patients need more opportunities to participate in clinical trials. But in spite of this, only a small portion of patients who could participate in a clinical trial are able to do so. Patient-centered research in nephrology is becoming more common as researchers look for meaningful outcomes that can be used to gauge progress. Kidney disease education and patient activation are key factors in preventing progression and helping patients live in the context of their disease. Has science come a long way in extending life for kidney patients? These are just some of the things we're going to discuss today in our conversation. But before we dive in, we have some quick housekeeping items. We want to hear from you, so please use the chat box to send us your questions. We'll answer questions as they come up, and if we miss any, we'll try to answer them at the end of the discussion. And we also have a brief survey that you can complete anonymously, which we very much appreciate. So now let me tell you about our panelists here today. We have a wonderful group of people joining us this month, starting with Charmaine Griffith. She's a ReMend mentor and patient advocate. Cindy Polis, she's a care coordination management education nurse with Balboa United. Dennis Bourque, he's actually the ReMend co-founder, a mentor and a patient advocate. Jessica Fraga, she's a study manager for InnAVasc Medical. Shawn Gage, he's the founder and director of clinical operations at InnAVasc Medical. And Dr. Ramin, I think I said Ramin, Berenji, Dr. Berenji, vice president of Balboa Nephrology and Balboa Research. So I want to welcome all of you. Let me see. Stop my share here. And please, here they are. Here I am. Hey, Cindy. Charmaine.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Hey, Dennis. Thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. This is going to be a really exciting conversation today. At first, I was like, well, clinical research, but as I kept getting into it, like I said earlier, there's so much. And right now I'm seeing so many people talking about it. So I'm happy that we're talking about kidney care research. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. We're going to go around the room and just get to know you a little bit. Let's start with Charmaine.
Hey.
Hey, Charmaine. Hey, so we're both patients. Dennis
Yep.
is also a patient. I wanted to ask you, during your kidney journey, did you ever consider participating in a clinical trial? And did you even know about a clinical trial? Did you know what they were?
You know, it's interesting that you and I were talking about this, and I didn't even know anything about clinical trials, like where I could find out about them. It was never even brought up as a patient. You know, I was just like oblivious to that they even existed as far as within the kidney community. I've heard about clinical trials in the past of various things, but the interesting thing is that I don't know if you wanted me to bring this up now about the transplant with the FK 506, or did you want to talk about that later? Maybe.
Sure.
Sure. Which one? right now. Okay.
If you don't want to, that's cool. We can talk
No,
about it
no,
later.
no, it's okay. You know, I don't have a lot of recollection about this because it was a long time ago. I've been transplanted now. It'll be 19 years in just a couple of weeks. And so during my first transplant in 1997, I was a part of I don't know really a lot about it, but it had to do with a medicine called FK506. And so I just wanted to kind of ask the panelists if they were aware of that, if they had heard of it, or if they could shed some light on it. The FK506, it was a liquid that I had to take, I had to keep cool, and I had to take it with orange juice. And so so I had to take it twice a day. I had to carry it in a little cooler with me and all of that. So again, unfortunately, I don't remember a lot about it. It was some type of, you know, they were, you know, trying it out, I guess, to see if it would benefit transplant patients. But again, I don't really recall a lot about it. So I just thought I'd bring it up to see if anybody else knew.
Yeah.
But that's all.
I've never participated in a clinical trial, and
Yeah.
you know, no one actually even talked to me about it. So I'm glad that we were having this discussion now. But
yeah, me too.
Luckily, we have someone that has been here and that has done a clinical trial, which we'll get into. But Dennis, I really would love for you to share a little bit about your story, so we get kind of a behind the scenes about, you know, before you delve into your experience with clinical trials. Tell us a little bit about your journey. You're muted. Hold on. Okay.
There you go.
There you go.
I've had kidney disease for about a little over 65 years. And through those years, I coped extremely well. But about 20 years into it, I started having an issue with kidney stones. And I spent plenty of time, I was living in Austin, Texas, with urologists and going through those procedures and surgeries. But I got sent to a nephrologist in Austin, and he said, Dennis, this is a complex disease, and I don't know how I can treat it here. I'm going to refer you to the General Clinical Research Center at University of Texas Southwestern that specialize in stones and bones for a mineral metabolism issue. So I went up to Dallas. I spent a week in a clinical setting. You know, they measured everything that was in, out, and that was the beginning of 20 years of me going back to Dallas every 2 or 3 months and spending a couple of days in there. Along the way, I was lucky enough to be able to have a group of doctors that realized I wanted to learn more about this and learn more about my disease. So they let me participate in a lot of the reviews. They let me get up in front of groups and talk to people about what it was to be a patient, et cetera. And I ended up on a few of the drugs that got FDA clearance, and it did change my life around.
Wow.
And, you know, the good part of it is when I moved to San Diego and I was seeing Dr. Boiskin, they collaborated with him for the before I had the transplant to make sure that my metabolism was running properly. So it was good. It was a good study for me, and it certainly gave me a good education.
We're going to get more into your experience and how you found out about clinical trials and just some of the things that you've done, because it's really fascinating. I wanted to welcome Cindy Polis. She is an education nurse for Balboa United. And in your experience, is there a high level of patient interest in clinical trials and research?
I'd have to say not yet. Not yet.
Yeah.
Maybe just because there's not an awareness of it.
Right.
So they don't know to ask for it.
See, that's what we're here to do.
Yeah.
Right.
So not yet. I haven't seen anything really come along for that. But I know I have patients asking for other things.
Oh, I know you do.
So,
thank you.
Yes.
Jessica, thanks for being here. Jessica Fraga with InnAVasc Medical. Could you please tell us about, you're a study manager at InnAVasc, and I know that you've worked with other clinical trials. What do you do as a study manager?
Yeah, so I help oversee just the operations and study flow between all of our team members and our sites, our clinical sites as well. So for example, there's a lot of moving parts in a clinical study at any given time. And each time point in the study, from when you first start it, to train everybody, to managing it, to then analyzing the data, and then ultimately submitting that to the FDA. My job is just to oversee all those moving parts and to make sure that we have like a cohesive team, that we are communicating with our study doctors, that we're working on recruitment, we're keeping on top of safety. We have data safety monitoring boards. We have always updating training.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, behind research, and in order to also keep compliant, with good clinical practices and FDA rules.
Wow, big job. A whole nother conversation. A whole nother conversation we could have is that a woman doing, clinical research. So another topic, some other time, possibly. Thank you for that. I did want to ask Shawn. Thanks for being here, Shawn, founder and director of clinical operations at InnAVasc Medical. Would you mind telling us about being a physician assistant in vascular surgery at Duke University Medical Center and how it led to you co-founding InnAVasc?
Yeah, for sure. We had a busy vascular practice at Duke. We're practice general vascular surgery. So that's sort of all things aortic disease, arteries in your neck, arteries in your leg, veins in your legs, or all over your body. And then hemodialysis access, or vascular access, we call for patients that require that blood access so they can get their blood cleaned on a dialysis machine. And it turns out that my partner and I were really the only two at Duke who were sort of willing to do that, or at least go into the trenches with the patients and really kind of fight for what they needed, because it's a tough job. Patients require a lot of care. Even the best of vascular access, they break down a lot. Even if they're in good shape, it's sort of like required car maintenance almost. So there's a lot of creativity that's required to either make a dialysis access functional to begin with, and then to keep it functional, because patients you're only born with so many sites that you can create a hemodialysis access, and before you're spent. And so it's really important. I learned very early on, it's how important it is to manage each one of those sites, the best that you can for the patient, so you don't blow through all their access, by the time they're 40 or 50 or 60. And so, so I really started to enjoy it. I really enjoyed the patients and really wanted to do something to help them, in a way that I wasn't seeing maybe the rest of the surgical community jumping in all the way to do so.
Right. Cool. And we're totally going to get into more about the product and everything that you and Jessica are working on, because it's fascinating and it's really interesting. So thank you for being here. Dr. Berenji, hello. Thank you for being here. My question for you is, what are some of the most significant changes in renal care that you've observed since becoming a physician? And I ask you this because I wonder if there were clinical trials that might affect your answer.
Well, as a nephrologist, I always struggle with this, that nephrology is a field that we get to the patients at a late stage, and there's not much we can do. And that's what really always bothered me. And being a nephrologist is the most exciting thing, however, for me, because nephrology is just a very, very satisfying specialty, both from physiology standpoint, and other than that is the patient's care, that you have to have a certain relationship with the patients in order to be successful in your treatments. But when I started research about 10 years ago, and one of the reasons I became interested was because I saw that there was a little bit of hope to do things earlier on. to help the patients.
Mhm.
The emergence of ACE inhibitor and ARB was the first thing. So that's something that we can do to delay the progression of kidney disease. And then there other studies came along that kind of make me to feel that, okay, if I do research and I can really bring this therapies to my patients, we may be able to change their outcome. We may not cure it, we may not treat it, but we may kind of delay, or maybe help them feel better, like the therapy with erythropoietin, right? So that's why made me actually to kind of get more interested in clinical research, and I've been doing that for the past 10 years. So yes, it has evolved for me. It became something that I think goes with our value in Balboa, because our vision is patient-centered care and value-based care. And research actually aligns with that. If we can bring value to the research to our patient, how much satisfying it is. And with now kidney disease being a little bit more attractive for research, if we have more opportunities to do more for our patients.
And I just have a side note too. Congratulations to Dr. Berenji, just announced as Vice President of Balboa Nephrology and Balboa Research. So thank you for all you do for the kidney community, and congratulations. Awesome. So let's just get into it, guys. So what is a clinical trial, Dr. Berenji? Why should people participate in a clinical trial?
I think before we get there, I think I answered your questions you asked before. Why aren't there more patients involved in clinical trials, right? So I think there's twofold and two aspects to it. One is awareness. Yes, there are people not aware. But the other thing is people are aware, but they're scared. There's a fear and misconception that when they do participate in clinical research, they are being used, and I've been told that many times, a guinea pig, as being experimented on. And believe it or not, there's not only patients. Actually, there are physicians. When for example, I have a patient on some medication or study drug, and they come from the primary care physician and said, "Oh, my physician says I should not take that because I'm, being used as a guinea pig." And I said, "Are you serious? I cannot believe a physician would ever say that." So this is a misconception around that is prohibits patients actually to kind of wanted to be involved, because they always think that something going to happen to them, right? So as a community, as scientists, physicians, we haven't done a good job to kind of take away this misconception. So clinical trials actually are scientific studies that we try to answer a question about a medical or an instrument or a diet or the behavioral changes that would change the outcome of the patient. We're trying to answer a question, and we use the clinical trial to kind of help the patients to see if we can improve their diseases in different forms and fashion. And the one question is always is that how safe is it for me? Is because for everyone you want to say, does it have a side effects? And you have to kind of, again, that just comes to kind of explain to them that when a medication comes to a level of that we use in human beings, they have gone through so many phases, many years of research to find out their efficiency and also their safety. And the only way you can do it, is with communication and education. And that is something that is really close to my heart, because I think we can really do a lot for our patients that they are not aware of, by just take away the misconception of what clinical research is and what really how good for the patients are.
Thank you for that. And it's a great segue into Dennis. Let us know what your experience has been like with clinical trials. Like you mentioned a little bit about it, but I really want to know, how did you find out about the trials and which ones did you choose to participate in, and just what a difference it's made in your life?
Well, the clinical trial was brought to me by my doctor, and he told me that where I was going to get the clinical trial done would be an excellent facility with doctors that understand the disease. For me, it gave me hope because there were a few doctors that were perplexed with the disease I had at that given time. And this allowed my two doctors to recommend me to this trial. And along the trial, I started educating myself about my own disease and my own body and how I'd be able to deal with it. So to me, it was a lifesaver. I just must have hooked up with a really good team of doctors and a good clinical center, but it really changed my life around.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to talk to Shawn and Jessica and just talk about InnAVasc. Would you explain what you're working on? And it's kind of a silly question, but why is it called InnAVasc?
Yeah, sure. So that's it's interesting. It brings me back to the beginning of when came up with the idea that we had, and then so came up with the idea of this safer dialysis graft. And so just a quick background of all that vascular access care and the problems that I would see and take care of and fix in the operating room. So there's got to be a better way to protect patients from this. Is ridiculous. We work really hard to establish a vascular access, and the patient goes off and they're using it, and then a month later it's wrecked and deflating for me, but I'm not the patient, right? I can imagine how the patient feels. That to come back in the hospital, long hospital stay, huge hassle, operation again. And so I just it was just ridiculous. And they're just
why did it get that way? I'm sorry. Why was it wrecked?
Because your dialysis grafts or fistulas or grafts require a needle puncture, 2 needles, one for the arterial side where you pull the blood out and it gets cleaned in the dialysis machine, and then the venous needle pushes back in the clean blood into the circuit. And those are really big needles. It's not like a tiny little 22 or 23 gauge needle that you get your blood drawn with. These are 15 gauge needles sometimes, and that's just in terms of needle, that's a large needle. It's like a little mini sword because they're very sharp on the end, and so you can do a lot of damage very quickly. Even in skilled hands, dialysis access can get tough to identify and get the needle into the right spot. And so we thought, hey, let's figure out a way to give them 2 distinct cannulation zones or 2 puncture zones that when you poke the needle into it, you can poke as hard as you want essentially, and it's not going to poke out of the back side of the graft or the side of the graft or cut through the side of the graft, which can create a big disaster for bleeding. And then when you pull the needle out, let's make it so it doesn't bleed, so you don't have to put pressure on it for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, depending on if you have other problems in your dialysis circuit. You pull the needle out and you go. And so that was the idea. Let's make it easy to identify. Let's make it so you can't wreck it with a dialysis needle, and let's make it so it doesn't bleed and you can get out of there. And so thinking of ideas when, creating this in a university, creating any kind of product or idea in a university, you have to go through the whole, licensing pathway and disclosure of your invention to the university, and they may or may not help you with it. And then because the university helps you with it, generally they own the license to the idea, to the product, even though I'm the inventor. And then if you want to go and do something with that, you really sort of need to start a company around that. And so I said, hey, we want to do something with this. We want to take it out of the university. And so, then it's just like, the silly things like we got to create a name, for this company. And we just eventually came up with something. We thought we were innovative. We thought we were being innovative. And, we're dealing in vascular access. That's our expertise. And so that was the InnAVasc. And then, play on the A, arterial, V, venous in our logo. And so that's
So
kind of
cool.
Yeah, I love the stories behind names like that. That's very cool. So you are currently going through clinical trials right now, correct? Right, Jessica?
Yes, currently we're doing what's called a phase 3 pivotal study that the FDA is currently reviewing. We give them safety reports at certain intervals. And our goal is to treat 60 patients. We've treated 45 to date, so we have 15 more to go. And it's really exciting for us. We're coming down the home stretch.
Nice. I think you're working with Balboa Research and Dr. Berenji's crew. So that's very cool. So cool to have you guys here together, how this all worked out. Yeah. So you mentioned different phases of clinical trials. So if somebody's participating, what should they know about that? What should they know about the different phases of clinical trials?
Sure. Dr. Berenji mentioned something about that, before, patients are hesitant to participate because they're just worried about, the safety and being tested on, but there are different phases of trials you can sign up for. Phase 1 of a clinical trial is typically, prior to that, there's something called, you do animal models, bench testing animal models, where depending on the device, you're using, I'm speaking about devices here just to keep it simple. There's just a lot of like bench testing using different skin types, animal models. Then it moves into phase 1 clinical trials, which is usually like the first humans essentially. Patients for that are definitely, it's definitely a very serious conversation. It always is with their study doctor. But again, a lot of testing goes up to that point. Before you get to that. Then there's phase 2, which is sort of in between. It's a little bit, after the FDA looks at your phase 1 data, they say, okay, we want to see this a little bit more. You can expand your patient population. You can treat more patients. And then phase 3 is the last stage before you get to, before you're approved for marketing by the FDA and you become a product that you see out on the market and you see commercials out there, just like every other, medical device you see advertised on TV or medicine that you take, they all had to go through that final phase of clinical trials and then be released, if they get FDA approval out into the world of marketing. So we are in that final stage. This is the last clinical study before we get that approval. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Kind of a general question for all of you.
Sorry, keep going. Can I just add to that just real quick? Sure. Sorry. I just wanted to kind of reiterate for the patients listening that the amount of work and testing done leading up to the even first in human studies, it is an excessive amount of testing. And as Jessica said, it goes back to bench stuff where you're not even involving a living creature, and then you evolve into living creatures. And you do it in a safe way, in a humane way. And then even beyond that, you have to get an approval to get into humans. It's called invention or investigative device exemption. And there's a whole battery of testing and approvals that are required to even get to that point, which is, even things like literally taking the device and grinding it up and then exposing doing different types of biocompatibility testing and exposing, smaller creatures to that to make sure that it's not toxic to them. And so there's all sorts of fancy testing before you even get that big approval, which is just to get to your phase 1 human stuff. When in devices, a lot of times it's sort of, okay, now, like, are there any like funny little mechanics maybe that we couldn't test in animals? And then we have to do that in humans. And so, you, in terms of the battery of safety, you really have a great understanding before you even get to that first phase 1 human testing.
Wow. I wanted to talk about kidney research. And Dr. Berenji, do you feel that kidney research has fallen behind other research like cancer or cardiovascular research? And if so, why?
Well, yes, for sure. I mean, the amount of research being made for oncology is just tremendous.
Mm-hmm.
It is what it is. It's just like everybody is very interested in developing anti-cancer, which is obviously, something that really we all are interested to do. Cardiovascular disease, the same thing. The kidney disease has been ignored just because, as I said, most of the time when we encounter the patients historically are the late stages. So what we can do is provide dialysis, all right, or transplant. But before that, how can we delay the progression? How can we do to help patients to even one day of not having dialysis is one day of not having dialysis important. So that has not been in any big pharmaceutical companies' radar for various reasons. Could be financial gain, could be just the patient population was not prominent, or they're not interested. So now, actually, for the past 2 years, I see that it's really is on big pharmaceutical companies' radar, being interested to delay the progression, being interested in improving their quality of life, what's called quality of life studies, how a medication can really improve their well-being. So there are different ways and aspects of research now that really focus on kidney disease, because now kidney disease is becoming very expensive, right? So patients on dialysis are very expensive. So everybody is trying to say what we can do to help the patient at the same time decrease the cost. So I think now everybody is trying to kind of pay attention to it.
Right, right. Well, great. I mean, because there's so many people trying to spread the awareness. I mean, if people are watching this webinar, that's awesome. I'm just, if you don't come here for information, I hope you're getting information somewhere, because before, when Charmaine and I were diagnosed, was it 20 plus years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of information about kidney disease or dialysis, much less clinical trials. So this is a really exciting time. And like I said, I'm getting all these emails now about people wanting to talk about clinical trials. And I don't know if it's because I put it in Google or something, but people are actually emailing me about, clinical trials and what's happening in kidney research. So going back to you, Dr. Berenji, so what role does kidney research play now and in the future of clinical trials? Do you see it evolving even more?
I think so. I think I am very excited, because I believe that within the next 5 to 10 years, we really practice differently in nephrology. There are a lot of things evolving, from genetics to genomic, wearable dialysis apparatus, new drugs for prevention of kidney disease, heart disease. And remember, a lot of patients with chronic kidney disease, even before they get to late stages or dialysis, they die from cardiovascular disease. So that combination, if we have a patient with chronic kidney disease, we know for sure they have cardiovascular disease. Why don't we just do something to help them with the cardiovascular? So we actually going to collaborate with cardiologists and nephrologists together to see what we can do to prevent. Medications such as SGLT2 inhibitors that are on the market right now has shown to really help both kidney and heart. And starting those patients early on with CKD, that is just phenomenal. So we can really build on it and try to kind of pay more attention and have more awareness and more education to the patients and populations and doctors and and institutions, no matter where, that these are the things that we can do for the patients to improve their well-being, their outcome, the prevention. Sometimes that makes a big difference in the future. So it is an exciting time for renal research,
Mhm.
actually.
And I wanted to share some information if people are interested in learning more about clinical trials. It's just some stuff that I have, ReMend is not affiliated with any of these organizations, but a couple of them are pretty cool. Antidote.me, they have clinical trials with a Find Your Clinical Trials match. You put in specific information and they have some type of algorithm that can hook you up with, information on clinical trials. Centerwatch.com. It's an industry-sponsored clinical trial seeking volunteers. Clinicaltrials.gov, I think, is the gold standard database of privately and publicly funded clinical studies conducted around the world. And researchmatch.org, it's a nonprofit program funded by the National Institutes of Health, and it helps connect people interested in research studies with researchers. So if, people are interested, have any of you professionals, have you heard of those before? What are your thoughts on, and do you have any to add, or tell me no, don't recommend that one? Anyone?
All of them are pretty good. I think we use it as a research actually to look at different opportunities that they could provide. We also, on the Balboa research site, we are working to also have our own way for patients to know what research Balboa research is doing. So actually they can go on our site. I think Kiko, you're helping us with that and try to improve it. And we're going to do much more than that. For whoever goes on the Balboa Nephrology site, when they click on the patient and research, they come a list of all the things that we are going to do and we have been doing. And if you're interested, maybe by one click, they can contact a person and can participate.
Right.
So that's something we do, but I think all the sites that you are bringing here, I think they're all good sources for patients' information.
Great, thank you. And Jessica and Shawn, I did see InnAVasc on the clinicaltrials.gov. Are there others that you have been on and any that you can recommend, or others? What are some of the other ones that you're on? People could find more info.
Clinicaltrials.gov, and then we also have a company website, which is InnAVasc.com.
Okay.
That we have a tab there for patients if they want to click on that. It explains a little bit more about what the device is and shows a video of how the cannulation works, and also they are able to see the participating locations. And so for your area, it would be Dr. Hart at Balboa Research is who they would contact to learn more about being a candidate.
But one of the other renal focus sites as well that has a lot. We have a close relationship with AAKP, American Association of Kidney Patients, and they have an area where they list clinical trials for renal disease, and so we're on there as well, but among several other trials. And then Home Dialyzers United also has some information for patients with kidney diseases.
And I think too, the National Kidney Foundation, the OG, they have information about clinical trials. So thank you for sharing that info. Question for you, Dennis. So when you were participating in those clinical trials, did the staff educate you about the study protocol and how the trial not only could help you, but with other patients? Like, what was that like when you were participating?
Well, first and foremost, it all started with my doctor realizing what trial I needed to be on and if he was going to be involved in it. I mean, I think it's key with kidney disease that the nephrologist is really at the center of this. If you recommend that we go through a clinical trial that's going to solve a problem for us, I'm going to always side with my nephrologist and take his input on, is this good for me? What am I going to get out of it? And when is it going to be released to other patients? So Dr. Berenji, is Balboa doing that right now? Are you guys proactively discussing trials with prospective patients?
Well, what we are trying to do, I don't know what, can you see me still?
Yeah, I can see you.
Okay. Yeah, so we are actually restructuring at this point, and we are trying. We have right now 10 primary investigators, and that we kind of really actively involved to discuss this with the patient. But I think we need to kind of do a better job with non-primary investigator to kind of spread the research and what we do. Again, that's awareness, and awareness somehow has not been very strong, and we have not done a good job. But moving forward, that is really on our radar to do the better job to do so.
Well, we're talking about really basic stuff here. So what is a private investigator?
Primary investigators are actually the physicians involved or non-physicians involved doing the research. So they are in a day-to-day involved in the patient's care, in the research, in their make sure that everything is done right, safety, monitoring the blood work, monitoring there's adverse event, and I mean everything that goes on the research side for a patient, it's on the primary investigator.
So does and Shawn and Dr. Berenji, I think you can both maybe answer this. Does a research team actually collaborate with the patient's primary care or specialist during a trial? Or is it every man for himself kind of thing?
Well, we try, not always possible. We try to inform the primary care physicians or care provider that patient is on a research study, and in a different way, but we certainly let the patients know that when they go to primary care physician, they have to make sure that they are, for example, in this medication, and if they want to add another medications or anything like that, make sure that we are aware and they know, just to make sure that there is no interaction. A lot of time we try, but again, it's the outreach is not as effective as it should be.
I would agree. Speaking from the surgical side to the medical side. So, our principal investigators generally are for a surgical device study are generally the surgeons, not always, but generally the surgeons. And in a vascular access study, I wish that we could have better, or when I say we, my principal investigators could have a little bit better communication with their nephrology counterparts. And it can be difficult because it's, there's the patient's primary nephrologist, but then there's the dialysis unit and the dialysis group that they're with. There is generally a different nephrologist that is a medical director of that dialysis unit. And so it would be great for all of those people to know, like, hey, Mrs. Jones is is either interested in this clinical trial. We think she'd be great for it. Or she is in this clinical trial. We've enrolled her, and we want you to know about it now. And we want you as the nephrologist to know this is happening, and we want the dialysis unit to know, so that we can just take the best care of the patient. And it is more difficult than I think it should be, and an area that I wish we could improve, we work to improve. And it's probably like that in other areas of medicine as well. But this one I just know well, and it's more complicated than it should be. And, and patients, aren't always able to articulate everything to all of their different clinicians of what they're involved with, because it's complicated stuff.
Right. So with patients that are dealing with multiple illnesses, like with kidney patients, many of them are dealing with diabetes and high blood pressure. I mean, isn't that even more difficult? Is that one of the reasons why you aren't able to find as many patients for this as you would like? Is that one of the challenges that you have, because there are different modalities that they're using? I mean, what is that a challenge?
It comes down to what is your inclusion exclusion criteria for a clinical study. We have a whole set of what you have to meet to be included, and things that if you have or different issues, then you have to be excluded. And it just kind of depends on what you're doing and what phase of a study sometimes as to how stringent you are. At this stage that we are, we've chosen to be pretty broad. And on one hand, you don't want to be accused, by the, the regulatory agencies that you're sort of cherry picking, the best patients possible, because that just isn't real world. That's, our patients aren't the healthiest of all dialysis patients because they're all comers. And then on the other side, sometimes you want to be careful not to be too crazy broad, because then you have like the sickest of the sick, and your results can get a little messy because you've got patients having all sorts of other adverse events or problems that aren't related to your device or your drug. And so you kind of got to be careful to walk that line, but ours is pretty broad for this clinical study. But even then, so we leave it up to the investigators in terms of things like high blood pressure or the degree with which their diabetes are controlled or not. Our last study, we were a little more stringent. It was an earlier feasibility study, and we had sort of numbers around like how bad is their hemoglobin A1C for diabetes, for instance. And that has complications in and of itself of like having to get a patient another test to be in a study, because that costs money. And it's something that patients don't generally do before they have surgery for this type of surgery. So we went away from that, and now we have the investigators using their best judgment of, is this person sort of a controlled diabetic or not? And if they're not, we don't generally want them in, generally because they have so many other related medical problems that it can make the results of a study a little messy. So,
yeah, I bet. Well, what questions would you suggest people ask? And I've got a couple that I'm going to share, but I'd like everyone's feedback on this. So here are just a few questions to ask when you're volunteering for research studies. And I wanted to ask our panelists, what would you suggest people ask researchers conducting the clinical trial? And you don't have to answer these, but I just thought, these are things people might want to consider. How long will the study last? What's the goal of the study? How many study visits will I have to attend? What kinds of tests or procedures will be performed? Will I be able to take my regular medications during the clinical trial, which is kind of a big one, right? And then how will I receive the treatment or be monitored? What can I expect at each study visit? What happens if I leave the study visit early? Who will be conducting the study? What are the potential risks and benefits of the study? And what will the results of the trial be provided to me? And one question I left off of here, how much do I get paid? I mean, come on, for real. I mean, I know that people are going to want to know that, right? So I'm curious to know, and Jessica, you touched base on this the other day with us. How is that set? Like, how do you know what you're going to be able to charge or provide a person that is participating as far as compensation?
I'll just speak to all the questions first. So before you do a clinical research study like this, and many of what Shawn was saying, this is an investigational device exemption, phase 3 clinical trial, you need something that's called an informed consent. And that is a form that is critical and so important, and is a tool that also empowers the patient to be able to sit with their study doctor and review. All these questions here should be, they will be answered in the informed consent, because that informed consent that tells you everything about the research study, what benefits, risks, study visits, everything is in there as a guide for them to answer all these questions and discuss with their study doctor, and then they would sign off on that. So those are really important. And as just all the studies I've ever done, you're, as a research patient, you should know that this isn't, if there's a study that you're interested in, you can ask to see the informed consent and take it home, talk to your family about it, bring it to your primary care physician and go over it. And bring it back to the study doctor or the clinic that's running the clinical research study, and you can decide, you want to go in it. The amounts that are also, patients are reimbursed for their time and travel, are also usually, most research studies do compensate for that, and there's a section in there, the informed consent, that states the amount per visit. They're different for all types of clinical research studies, depending on what's decided with kind of like the burden for each visit. Right. But again, the informed consent, just knowing that word, knowing what it is very important, I think, for all research potential patients to understand.
Great.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
I think just touching back on the informed consent piece, as a patient, you're looking at this form, and in general, like what our Jessica for our clinical study, it's like 30 pages long or something. It's extremely long. The informed consent when doing an operation on somebody is generally 1 to maybe 3 pages long at the most. They're pretty short informed consent forms, but a clinical trial informed consent is extremely long. And I say that, I bring that up because I don't want that to be intimidating, because oftentimes patients, I'll sit right there with the patient and they see it and they're like, I don't think so. Because it's overwhelming. There's all this paper and you're like, what am I supposed to get out of this? But what you're supposed to get out of it are all the things that you had listed there, as Jessica said, are really kind of required to be in clinical trial informed consents now, because we need to make sure that patients are informed. And this is something that I talk about in a talk that doesn't have anything to do with my device, but just about clinical research in general, is you've got to sit down as a clinician and or a study coordinator or both. You really have to have this rapport with patients, so you have this trust and understanding of like, hey, look, I'm only approaching you with this because I think that it's safe enough, or I think that there's a benefit value for you and other patients. And patients need to feel that and understand that. And if they just sort of have a form kind of thrown at them, nobody's going to sign up for clinical research. And so as part of that process is sort of going through some of that stuff too. It doesn't have to be super in the weeds. They can read that, but you can kind of point them to like, here's what this is saying. At a high level. And that's just kind of gets into the art and in the understanding of clinical research and consenting patients or potential subjects. And so just for you out there listening, that's why these forms are so big. And I'm hoping that your potential investigators are out there and coordinators are out there kind of taking you through it in a way that's digestible.
Great.
I totally agree. I think that is one of the important things is that our patients are informed, that they know what they're getting into. And also it's very important for them to know that whenever they decide that they don't want to participate and they want to stop, they always can. It's not for them to be, thinking that they are forced to continue. That is a volunteer thing to do. The more informed they are, the more discussion you have. And obviously, the physicians are keys, or the care provider are the keys, because they have a trust between the patient and the care provider, and that really helps for the patients to understand that how important it is and how safe it is if they participate.
Right. Great information. Thank you both. One last thing, before we end our webinar today, we're closing in on the time here. I'd like to ask our panelists, what do you hope our viewers will learn from our conversation today? Shawn, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I think, a lot of it is, how much, people that are involved in sort of I guess I can speak from my perspective of, where this came from, right? I mean, I'm one of the few that can speak from the kind of the bench, to bedside, or really rather bedside to bench, and then back to bedside again, delivering this to patients. And it's rare that gets to happen. And it's been a wonderful learning experience for me to see it all the way through. And it's really allowed me to be able to now, I think, articulate the whole process of this to clinicians or other potential principal investigators in a way that makes sense to them, because I once was an investigator and I had a lot of the questions or misunderstandings about clinical research. And now I understand it from a different side. And then as well as the patients, like understanding how they feel when you're approaching them about clinical research, and what it potentially means to them, but potentially millions of other people that will benefit on sort of the backs of those willing to be a part of this. And it really is so important. We wouldn't have any of the medicines or devices and advances that we have in this world today if patients weren't willing to sort of take that little leap of faith to be a part of, whether it's a phase 1 study or a phase 3 study, or And it's so important. And so we thank you, but it's just something to kind of open up about, think about, open your mind and think about what potentially can I do for others, even though you're benefiting yourself, hopefully too, here in these research studies, but it really is bigger than you. It's bigger than, a lot of people. So, yeah.
Right. Such a great point. Why is it important to participate in a clinical trial? Because you could be helping people in the future, not only yourself, but God, that's fascinating. Jessica, how about you? What are you hoping people take away from our conversation?
I would say that, just to make sure that, if you have questions about your current care and you might be frustrated and you're looking for other options, that to look at the resources that you provided, go to clinicaltrials.gov, Google things in your area, and sort of advocate for yourself, because there could be interesting things out there that could potentially be a huge benefit, and that may pave your participation, could pave the way to help other people. Again, knowing about the informed consent, just having a good conversation with your study doctor to say, hey, or your actual doctor, sorry, not your study doctor, just asking, hey, do you know anybody in the area that might be doing trials around my particular, issue? Doesn't even have to just be for this, could be other things going on in your life. And there's always trials going on. And but use the tools that you provided and advocate for yourself.
Right on. Thank you. Dr. Berenji, what do you think? What would you like people to take away from this conversation?
One thing that Dennis says when he was on clinical trial, he said, I got hope. Having hope and giving hope to others, that's what clinical trial does. It really means a lot to that person, but it means a lot to a whole lot of people. There are people that do that because they want to help others. They're going to hope others that they have a disease, and they are at times frustrated and they don't know what else to do. And the important thing is for everybody to understand that clinical trials are safe. They are not being used as a guinea pig. They're not experimented on. It is when they are in that level, that means that we have done everything we could to make it as safe as possible, effective as possible. Side effects, you can have an aspirin have a side effect. You can have Pepsi, you have a side effect. You can have Tylenol have a side effect. But again, the important thing is to understand that we did everything we could to make it as safe as possible for everyone. And they are going to be part of the bigger things, as Shawn says, help potentially millions of people and giving hope to millions of people.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I've got one last comment. Kidney disease obviously is a complex disease that you're going to live with your whole life, but this is foreign to a lot of patients that are suffering kidney disease, and they want to deal with their immediate effects. I think that Balboa is perfectly situated to not only train the patients or educate the patients, but also start a mentor program where you've got patients that have been through similar trials or other trials. They could sit down there and have a discussion with them and let them know how they benefited from this drug in the process they went through.
We are trying to structure such thing, and Kiku is working with us. We exactly are going to do this. We're going from previous patients that they have been in the research, and try to make everybody, other patients, understand what is research about, what their experiences has been. So point is already well taken.
Point is taken. So be on the lookout for some interesting information from Balboa Research. We're working on that. Charmaine and Miss Cindy, I know I didn't ask you guys a ton of questions at all, but what would you like to, what are some things you'd like to share about the discussion today? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally fine. Like, I learned so much, and I think that the thing that I'm taking away from all of it is just not to feel any fear, and just, I'm always going back to ask questions. You have to ask questions because it's your health, whether it's a clinical trial or, or just questions about your own care with your PCP. You know, it's so important that you ask questions. And I think that this webinar is just bringing to light for so many of us, myself included, just how important they are, clinical trials, and that they've come a long way from days of the guinea pig, so to speak, you know. So yeah, so thank you guys so much, Jessica, Shawn, Dr. Berenji, you know, for making dialysis better. Being a dialysis patient, yeah, it's pretty awesome.
How about you, Miss Cindy?
It was very informative today, so I appreciate the opportunity to be here and listen to everybody. It's nice to know that there is all this good clinical research behind closed doors that, you know, we're not able to really share with our patients on a daily basis. So today was very inspiring. So what I would like to do and what I will do is take this information today and share it with my patients, because sometimes I just feel like I run out of good news, you know, and this is good news. So this would be hope, like Dr. Berenji said. So they're, especially if they're early on and they're at the beginning of the process, you know, so there is hope for home hemodialysis, a better access, an easier access to eliminate so many of those fears. So for me to have the opportunity to share that, and to share that there's new medications for CKD patients. So it's enlightening to know that we have this in the pipeline. So any opportunity that I can share some sunshine on my patients, right?
Awesome.
So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I want to thank our panelists for a great discussion, very informative, and thank you for agreeing to participate and help educate folks about research opportunities out there. And we hope our viewers find this information helpful and encourages them to learn more about clinical research. I also want to make sure if you or someone you know is dealing with kidney disease and would like to speak to someone who's been on their own kidney journey, you could reach out to ReMend. Our website address is remend.org. You could reach out on our contact page to see how you can be involved by donating or even becoming a mentor. And you can also check out our previous webinars on remend.org, our YouTube channel, which is kind of exciting, and also on our Facebook page. We have some people joining us on Facebook. So anyone else have anything else to say? That's it. Okay, well, I want to let you guys know, I want everyone to know about our upcoming webinar. We're going to be talking about plant-based diets. So it's really exciting, and I hope people can join us on that one. If no one has anything else to say, I guess I'm going to thank you all and let people know that, you know, if you're on your kidney journey, we just want you to know you're not alone. So thank you so much for watching, and peace out.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for being
Nice to
here,
see you
guys.
all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.